Just as an introduction, today we're gonna hear Cy Washburn's thesis proposal. Cy will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 or 10 minutes for questions. Anybody can ask a question. If you would rather not speak your question aloud, you can put it in the chat and I will read it aloud for Cy. And I think that's all I need to let you know. So without further ado, here is Cy Washburn.
All right. So I'm just going to assume you guys can see my screen. If you can't, speak up. But so my thesis proposal, the working title right now is called "The Things You Love Are Killing Me." And this kind of evolved out of me trying to find meaning in my artwork, which stems from me just trying to find meaning in life, to be honest, or things that I truly care about. And photography, I'm a photographer, so trying to find meaning in photography was even harder for me. But this kind of deals with the things you love are killing me. I feel like that is the voice of Mother Nature or our Earth kind of crying out to us. And so when I do my photography, I use liquids and fire to kind of bridge this link between hyperconsumerism or excess to the global climate. And that's kind of like an umbrella type of an idea or theme that I have with my artwork. And I'm gonna have to get with Megan and do in my writing and just kind of figure out if I can be broad or if my work can evolve and have really different meanings behind it, because the more recent work that I did is really more personal. It deals with my own imperfections and flaws and dealing with those things and having acceptance of myself as an artist and who I am. So I don't know if it can be specific or flawed, but it's something that I'm really exploring. I think it's kind of impossible to talk about my concept without talking about my process. I think those two are side by side in my work. But basically, I start with photography. It's black and white photography, and I just love creating visually kind of stunning images. And then with photography, I take the finished print and I soak in a liquid, set it on fire, and then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the final presentation of it. So with my photography, I love black and white. I love the contrast and these tonal ranges. When I was a little kid, I used to draw trees with the branches brown and the tree trunks green. And that warranted a quick trip to the eye doctor by my mom. And we figured out that there was something wrong with my eyes. And I don't see the world in pure black and white, but I definitely don't see it, or I don't see color as well as I do. So I've let go of color aspect of it. I love black and white. I love the tonal ranges. I love creating really stunning, high contrast, low key type of imageries with these different forms where you could get in really close to the detail and see leading lines, leading and creating new shapes and what that does to the eye or the imagination. I love the texture and finding out and exploring new images or new shapes within the image itself. And I think what I love about photography is the kind of the technology about it, like having a really nice sensor and a really nice lens and getting in close and zooming really far in and being able to see like the details of something really, really close, something that the normal eye would not be able to see under normal viewing conditions. I think in my work, the details, those small things, we can see the imperfections and we can see the flaws when we get really close to things. But I think those things are, you know, without sounding cheesy, I think those details and flaws and imperfections are what make us all kind of unique as human beings. The next step, I use liquids, and I'm going to stick with consumable liquids. I've done, like in the past, I've done motor oil and wood stain, and that just completely destroys the image. It turns it completely black. But when I print a photograph, I'm going to soak them in consumable liquids, and I think that transcends, or it lends to the conversation behind we humans ingesting or consuming these things inside of our bodies that are arguably somewhat unhealthy in large consumptions. And that relates over to kind of this global thematic concern that I have as well. This is just some examples of what happens to a black and white print after I've soaked it. I usually soak them for about 24 hours, and maybe once every hour or once every 2 hours, I'll try to remember to agitate it. But I just wanted to show you guys some kind of like imagery of the color of what happens when I soak it in different types of liquids. This is a little behind the scenes video that I put together. I wanted to show the demonstration of me agitating. This print was agitated in Fanta orange juice. And this just allows me to feel more like an artist and feel like I'm actually creating something. I kind of pay homage to the darkroom process. This is called creme brulee. I put raw sugar and a bunch of different liquids on this, and when I was setting it on fire, it actually smelled like creme brulee. And so I just translated that title over to this piece here. But I love exploring the surface and the textures and stuff like that. This piece has evolved from its original piece. Over the summer, the heat heated up the liquids with the sugar, and now it feels like it's like sick or diseased almost. So it's kind of like evolved over time, which I like. This next piece I soaked in coffee. It took me about 85 cups of coffee to be able to submerge this entire print, which is about 44 inches by 60 inches large. And I had to make this little tub to kind of soak it in. But the color on it really, I love the look of coffee after it comes out. And then the last piece is called a cold Fanta on a hot day. And what I love about, or what I've noticed, or one of the benefits, I should say, of doing it this way, soaking a print, I have to use a fine art rag paper like a Hanamule or Canson, but it's got to be 100% cotton so that I can really soak in that liquid. But doing this allows for the richness and the saturation of color within the print that I would not be able to get if I was to print this in color on a fine art rag paper. I might be able to print in color on like a glossy, but when I set it on fire, the glossy prints just don't have the same effect as if setting a fine art rag paper. The next step is fire. After the print dries, it dries for about 24 hours or so. I take it out to the back alley there. You guys ever wondering what I'm doing back there? I'm setting things on fire. And I just put together another little video. I apologize, this is a little bit more artistic than the stuff before, because I thought I might use video as one of my art pieces, but I feel like the viewing would have to be in very specific conditions. I really like dark rooms or dark lighting. I like the moodiness of it. So I feel like this would have to have special viewing conditions to see it. But I just love fire. I love the symbolism, the metaphors, even the allegories. That's where fire is used to describe certain things. And fire is one of those things that I might have, or video might be one of those things that I explore further and create part of it. But I have to have the reason as to why. I just can't, I don't want to just throw it up on the screen and not have a good reason as to why I'm showing video next to the still imagery. This is some after it's fire, what happens to the paper? It just, the image, rather than having this two-dimensional flat photograph to view, it really creates more of a sculptural feel to the image. It creates more of a dynamic look and something more interesting to look at. And it burns the paper, and it's super fragile afterwards. It's brittle. I move these things around and putting them up on the wall and taking them off, and it's flaking off. And I just have to accept the fact. It's one of those things, like, I have to accept that this is what's going to happen with my artwork. As careful as I am, it's still, they're going to fall off. So these little imperfections and flaws and scars of the paper, I kind of relate over to my own dealings with me as a human, and just dealing with art and struggling with imperfections and my flaws. And the final thing that I've considered is my presentation. And this series, I stumbled upon shadow boxes. I really love putting images inside of a shadow box. And then I also stumbled across a burning technique that you do on the wood called shaosugibon, and I'll show that to you guys in a second. But earlier I was talking about trying to find meaning, and this series itself was really, really personal and meaningful to me, because there are so many mistakes that I know that are there. It's kind of like how we judge ourselves as people. We know all of our own flaws, even if somebody else doesn't see them. Like, and this is one of those things of making a mistake and doing something over and having it flawed. Just having the grace and the forgiveness and the patience and the understanding that I'm going to make mistakes, that I'm not perfect, that this is just how it's going to be. One of the pieces that I'll show in a second, like, it was so badly, I almost threw it away. The plexiglass on it was scratched so bad, I almost threw it away, but then I did something to save it, and I'll show you guys in a second. But one of the techniques for the sugibon burning technique is kind of like a surface burn, and just visually or aesthetically pleasing. I just love, like, this zebra-like pattern that it creates. There's different looks that it can give, and different reasons as to why. But for the most part, it started out as like this visually aesthetic type of a thing, and then it turned into something a little bit more, where, like, if I took the burning technique to the full extent, the original shaosugibon burning technique, and just totally torched the wood, like on the left-hand image, it now has become flame retardant. So it kind of lends to this idea of actually protecting what is inside. This is the piece that I almost threw away, and I think it's one of my favorites. The scratches on the plexiglass went all the way around the entire inside of the frame. And so I was like, what do I do with this? So I just took my blowtorch gun and I scorched the plexiglass, all wherever there was a scratch. I torched it. And I don't want to get, sound cheesy with this, but I think when you, like, the symbolism behind fire and this idea of refinement, going through the fire, and like metal, when you put it and refine it, it becomes stronger. In the end, I just think I relate that to, like, this, like the scratches and the flaws that I have going through this process, going through this series, has made me stronger coming out of it, and knowing that these things exist and are going to exist in my life, but are going to make me better. Moving forward, just talking about a little bit of inspiration. I love fantasy. I love exploring fiction. I love going there every single night. I read a couple of chapters just to kind of drift away and let my mind wander. And last semester, Emily had a lot of patience with me with my inspiration, and she just kind of helped me investigate it and understand that inspiration can come in different forms. And so I think with fantasy, or some of my inspirations, I don't think that it inspires my work, like, directly, but I think it inspires me as not just like a human, inspires, but I think it inspires me as an artist, or it inspires me as a creator to inspires my imagination and sparks my imagination to like create something, whatever it is. I also love poetry. I've thought about, I write poetry. Um, I've thought about adding poetry to like the surface of my prints, adding that. There would have to be a reason why, obviously. So I'll talk with my amazing mentor this semester and figure out if that is something that might be feasible, or the reasons why. But there's like a poetics and the symbolism and the metaphor behind poetry. The poem on the right is one of my favorite poems, but it's so, so sad. And I think that when you look at my work, there obviously can be a sadness related to that. And I think Robert Frost, I mean, one of the greats, this poem I've always known, but I never had it in the back of my mind. But for some reason, 2 years ago, I think Robert Frost must have been, itching one of my brain cells, because just out of the blue, I had an idea to try to set a block of ice on fire. And I won't tell you how I did it. If you ask me, I'll just tell you it took one of the most flammable liquids that you can buy over the counter, which is more flammable than almost anything you can buy. But I just wanted to see what would happen and explore this process and investigate what would happen if I set a block of ice on fire. And I show you this not because I have any future plans with doing stuff like this, but because this is the image that kind of started it all for me, and started me moving forward with fire. Going back to some of my inspiration and the grades and the black and the white, when I first took photography, I was introduced to the history of photography. I was introduced to analog in a dark room, and I fell in love with some of the greats. Just the contrast and the black and the white and these mid-tones moving. I just think they're beautifully stunning images. And a few of them were in a group called F64. And F64 evolves around the aperture. F64 is the smallest aperture you can get, that has the largest depth of field. And what they wanted to do was, because of the large depth of field, they wanted to present the world as it is. That was like their concept. Other than shying away from pictorialism, they wanted to get away from that. But trying to present the world as it is, which is kind of funny, because when you look at these images, this is not how the world looks, right? I mean, it's not black and white. It's not that highly contrasted, unless you're somebody who struggles with color, unless your eyes struggle to see things how most everybody else sees things. I don't see the world this strongly contrasted, but I can relate to it because I see color differently. I see this world differently than a lot of other people do. So specifics about my thesis project, I would like to do 3. They're all gonna have digital photography. They're all gonna be printed on that fine art rag paper. They're all gonna deal with liquids, fire, and probably the wood frames on most of them. The very last piece is the one that I'm going to have to talk with my mentor, but also Russell, I think, is going to help me figure out the feasibility of doing a shadow box on this. This is a mock-up that I created. 2 summers ago, I was at the Broad Museum in Los Angeles, and I took a photograph of this woman standing in front of like a Jackson Pollock, where it was a really, really large painting. I took that and I put it into Photoshop, and I removed the painting and I put in my own photograph of this series of images, just because I wanted to see if I created something that was 8 feet by 8 feet, what it would look like with somebody kind of standing in front of it. But I titled this "The Things You Love." That might change. I actually like the title F64, just to continue to pay homage to the greats and where it all kind of started for me with my photography. but it's going to be 96 by 96, which is 8 feet by 8 feet. There's going to be 64 images. There are going to be 64 liquids that each image is going to be soaked in a different liquid. Each one of those prints is going to be 8 inches by 8 inches, and they're all going to be set on fire. And just my crazy brain, kind of, I love math, and I love geometry, and I love the scale, and I love the grid pattern. I think there's a cycle that you can see with things. I don't know why. I love it. But the idea behind this 8 times 8 is 64, and then it's an interesting way to spark a conversation about the why or the what I do now. So with all of that, I think another little interesting thing that I would like to do is, in the conversations, is people ask me, what's your medium? And I like to say that fire is my medium. I just think it's another interesting way to kind of create a conversation based on everything that I've shown you guys. So I just want to thank you guys again for being a part of this. And I'll hand it back to you.